Good afternoon for all of you. So today we are going to have the fourth lecture on the data visualization analysis, data visualization and management module. So today we are going to talk about the nested models. So here when we talk about nested models, so I find it useful to have an analysis framework to think about visualization that's got four levels and three questions as well. So let's start with the top level, that is the domain level, what I'll call the domain situation. So, and this is where we ask the question of who are the target users that we might be designing a visualization for. So, what particular problems do they have? What data do they have? What are they? What questions are they asking about that data? What specialized knowledge to do they have? So, this could be someone in finance, it could be someone in physics, it could be someone in biology, and they might have very different language for talking about what might at the core be really very similar problems from an abstract visualization point on view. So here, if you go through with these slides itself, so in the first slide, here I have mentioned the analysis framework with four levels and also with the three questions. So I'm summarizing that what I said earlier. So here with the domain situation, what I'm do here is I'm going to answer the question, who are the target users? So in this question itself, anyway, we are going to talk about the abstraction as well. For this abstraction, actually, we should translate from specifics of domain to vocabulary of visualizations. That is, these are actually some of the questions which we might have to ask for this data abstraction. We should ask what is shown. To the task abstraction, we should ask why is the user looking at it. So these are kind of few questions which we have to ask at each level itself. So, and that's where we get the next level, that is abstraction level. What we want to do is think about the visualization issues in a way that's agnostic to the domain. So, we want a sort of generic vocabulary of visualization. And so, at the abstraction level, there's a two main things we think about: what is being shown, so the data abstraction will be there, and why is the target user looking at it. That would be the task abstraction. And we might find that two people from, let's say, from physics and finance are really, in fact, doing something really structurally very similar. But maybe two biologists sitting next to each other in the same lab are actually doing very different things. So here, even though they are using some similar language to talk about them, so we really need this abstraction level to be able to reason about things in a domain independent way. So if we go through with this slide itself, what will happen here again? So the idioms are coming to the topic. So from these idioms itself, we are talking about how is it shown. That is, again, we are focusing on two specific scenarios, two specific factors. One is visual encoding and the other one is the interaction. So for the visual encoding, we have the idioms, that is we are finding answers for how to draw, answers for the question how to draw, and also for this interaction idioms we are finding answers, we have to find the answers for how to manipulate. Okay, and then so for this algorithm level also we are kind of efficient, we have kind of efficient computation for these algorithms itself. So now the earliest level, or else we can say the next level which we have to talk about in detail is idiom level. So we are asking how is it shown, and I'll split that again into visual encoding idiom. So how do we draw it, and the interaction idiom, which is how do we interactively manipulate that drawing. And so sometimes things are clearly one or the other. It's certainly possible to have idioms that really are inextricably combined, often coding with interaction, but sometimes it's useful to separate them as well. So that gives us the what and the why and the how. And then finally, we have this last level, the algorithm level. So how do we efficiently actually actually compute this and instantiate it is in a computational context? So it would be the question for us to answer at the last level or else at the last stage itself. Now, the reason that we are thinking about these four different levels separately in this thing I have called the nested model is, for one thing, I want to emphasize something that downstream. So we have this cascading effect as well. What do you think about the domain user effects your abstraction, effects your idiom choice, and then, of course, your algorithm is trying to instantiate that. So there is this cascade. I also want to emphasize that it's very, very uncommon that you simply blast through and do this once and you are done with it. So the common case is that you are iterative iteratively refining, so as you start to try out some of these ideas, maybe even after you implement them also, then you go up and change your understanding of what the user needs or what an appropriate abstraction is, and maybe change the idioms as well. So here I have given you kind of a very clear identification or else clear um, explanation about these three levels. So if we move to the next slide, as I told you now, so we have the nested model itself, and here what will happen for the downstream, that is cascading effect. From the domain situation, we will be moved to the data abstraction or else task abstraction, and then we might move to the visual encoding interaction idioms as well. Finally, we have the algorithm to implement. That is what we called it as nested model. So for this nested model, what will happen here is it will be kind of downstream one and cascading effects will be affected, and also it will be upstream iterative refinement as well. So here from this domain structure itself, we will be moving to data or task abstraction. Then from that data or task abstraction, we will be moving to visual encoding or interaction idioms as well. Or else finally, we will be moving to algorithms as well. Okay. So any questions? If you have any questions, you can start pressing a forum and ask on it. Okay, so that is it. So why is this validation is very difficult? So if we think about these facts, I mean, if we think about this question more and more, we might receive an answer that is because the different ways, there are so many different ways to get it wrong at each level. So for example, in the domain situation level, sometimes you misunderstood their needs as well. But in the data abstraction or the task level abstraction, sometimes you are showing them the wrong thing as well. Or sometimes in the visual encoding or else the interaction idiom, the way you show is doesn't work. Maybe sometimes the way you show is doesn't work. And also finally we have the algorithms. So algorithm in the sense that is the one who created alone. That is your code is too slow to upload. Okay, so that's it. So now we are going to find the answers for why is validation difficult. For why is validation difficult? So for their solution use methods from different fields at each level. So that is algorithm, maybe sometimes measure a system time or memory, and also and analyze computational complexity as well. These are kind of few subjects or few course modules you have selected for this uh, for this equation as well. So when we talk about this, why is validation difficult? So difficult, different ways to get it wrong at each level. So in the domain situation, sometimes you might understood their needs, and also data or task abstraction is available and you are showing them the wrong thing. So for this, what will happen? in the domain situation, you misunderstood, sometimes maybe you misunderstood their needs. And for the data abstraction or task abstraction, sometimes you are showing them the wrong thing. You might showed them the wrong visualization, or else sometimes visual encoding or interacted idioms are there, so the way you show it shown doesn't work. And also for the algorithms, your code is too slow. Why is validation difficult? So for the exact question, we have kind of an exact solution, that is use methods from different fields at each level. So for here, why is validation is difficult? Again, so the solution might be to use methods from different fields at each level. So in the designing field, we have visual encoding interaction idiom. So to justify design with respect to alternatives. And for the computer science level, we have the algorithms itself to measure system time or else the memory, and also analyze computational complexities as well. And finally, we have the cognitive psychology, that is the analyze the results qualitatively and also measure human time with lab equipments, lab study as well. So these are kind of technique driven work. So if I go through more, so for this domain situation, we might have like anthropology or ethnography examples as well. So here, why is validation difficult? Why is validation difficult? Because in the domain situation level, sometimes it might, we have to observe the target users using existing tools as well. And also for the data or task abstraction, and also for the visual encoding or interaction idioms, that is to justify design with respect to alternatives as well. So the latter parts will be kind of the previous ones as well. So for the design, we have the visual encoding or interactive idioms, and for the computer science, we have kind of algorithms, and for the cognitive psychologies, we have analyze, we already analyzed results qualitatively, and also we might measure human time with lab equipments as well. And for the anthropology or ethnography, sometimes maybe we have to observe target users after the deployments, so for the field study, and also the measure adoptions as well. And again, so why is validation difficult? So for the solution one, from top to bottom, we have the problem driven work, design graphy, and then for this algorithm level, we have technique driven work. So these are the two work types which we have. One is the problem driven work and the other one is the technique driven work. Okay, so for this, then what will happen? So what we need to memorize is we need to pick methods from different fields at each one of these levels. So at the algorithm level, one way we can check things is, well, we can certainly do computational benchmarks to measure the system time and also the measure the system memory as well. So for the more theoretically inclined among us, so we could analyze computational complexity as well. So these methods are well taught in a traditional computer science department. So a huge amount of the work and visualization is exactly doing this. So I'm going to call that technique driven work. So there is a quiet uh, a lot of work in visualizations at the algorithm levels as well, where you understand completely the context and you are just focusing on that algorithmic troubles as well. But what about the other levels? So we have to think about the other levels as well. So let's think about the idiom level. So first of all, even before we implement anything or design the algorithms, we might want to think about, well, what are the alternatives for idioms? We often grab methods out of design, especially the ideas of the ideation of multiple alternatives instead of just latching onto one idea, lacking onto one idea, and then never diverging from it. But what about after? But what about after we have actually got something instantiated? How could we figure out if we got the idiom level right? So, well, we grab methods out of a cognitive psychology, often by way of human compute interactions as well. And of course, we could just simply look at the results and analyze them qualitatively. But if we want to do something a bit more rigorous, we would often do a controlled experiment in a lab. Sometimes this is called a lab study or a user study, where instead of measuring how long it takes the computer to compute something, so we have got our stopwatch and we are measuring the people as well. We tell them, please do this using this particular tool, and we see how long it takes. We see how many mistakes they make. And so, of course, the methodology of running controlled experiment on human subjects is quite tricky. And there's a lot of nuances to get right, but we are not done yet. What about that abstraction and domain level? So, well, here's where we need to get methods out of the social sciences from anthropology and ethnography. We are actual observing people in a particular realistic context. That's again tricky. There's a lot of nuances about how to elicit information about what they are currently doing. So, taking to them is necessary but not sufficient. So, here and then and so then that's before designing, we might want to make sure to talk to them, and after we have designed something, instead of just looking at it in the laboratory context, maybe sometimes we need to deploy that tool and watch how people actually use it in realistic settings, not just in your own lab. And so we typically call that a field study. It is kind of still involves human subjects, but we are actually developing it and watching how it gets used. And it's almost inevitable that it's not used it. So, quiet the way originally had in mind. So, people are very good at making tools out of anything. So, the adapting their tools is so different use cases. Of course, we could also go things like that, things like just. So, measure how many people loggings. Adoption is an interesting signal. A lack of adoption doesn't mean that you misdesigned it. And in fact, you could have heavily adopted things that might not be the best, but it is a signal about whether which actually meaning real world needs. So these are all different ways to try to understand, did your solution work. When we start at start with that top level from the domain situation and work our all the way down, where we work with a group of target users and try to figure out the abstractions, and then the idioms, and then initiate those computationally we are often calling that problem driven car. So that is what we have about the why do we need a validation. Okay, so let's move to the avoid mismatches as well. So for this avoid mismatches, what do we have here is again, so for the domain situation, as the previous one, so for the domain situation, we have observed target users using existing tools, and for the data abstraction and task abstraction is there, and visual encoding or interaction idioms also there to justify design with respect to alternatives. So to this algorithm, measure system time or else measure system memory, and also analyze the computational complexity as well. So analyze results qualitatively and measure human time with lab studies as well. So computational benchmarks do not confirm idioms designs as well. Here, these tasks, if we consider these tasks, the lab studies do not confirm task, abstraction, computational, and also the benchmarks do not confirm idiom designs as well. That is all about the nested models. So if we go through with an analysis example, a single paper includes only subset of methods. Maybe sometimes only a single paper may include only subset of methods. So here again, I have mentioned the previous levels as well. And then for this analysis example, which is single paper includes only subset of methods. For example, Matrix Explorer, Henry and Fekete, info visualization in 2006. What are the things, what are the levels which we have to consider? Observe and interview target users, and then justify encoding or interaction design, which is measure system time or system memory. And then we have to identify qualitative results, image analysis, and another analysis is here, which observe and interview target users, and then justify encoding, iteration, interaction design as well. And then we have the qualitative result, image analysis, and finally we have the field study or as the document deployed usage as well. Here we have another one. It would be much closer to the qualitative or quantitative image analysis. And then we have the effectiveness of animation in trend visualization. And then we have the interactive visualization of genealogical graphs as well. These are kind of few analysis examples which we can have as a single paper includes only subset of methods. And finally, we have the flow map layout, which was published on 2005, which includes So the justify encoding or interaction method, interaction design, and or else computational complexity analysis measure system time or else the system memory. And finally, we have the qualitative results image analysis as well. So that's all about the data visualization analysis nested model. Okay, thank you so much for joining for the fourth lecture of the data visualization and management. See you with the fifth lecture.